Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson, the creator and founder of Advanced Health Genetics and also the Hormetics Weight Optimization System. And today, lovely listeners, as always, it's such a pleasure to have you. And we are going to be discussing a topic around fasting and detoxification. So the question that we're really looking at today is fasting the best way for your body to detox? So we are going to dive right in. So Elwin, tell me, why did we want to talk about this topic today?
Yeah, and we've done previous episodes, Chrissy, on, does fasting help you lose weight? And I hope that I've conclusively proven that, yes, it can short term. If you literally, starve your body, then obviously it will, in most cases anyway, lead to weight loss. If you do it persistently enough and long enough, the only challenge is it's pretty difficult to do it persistently enough and long enough to lose significant amount of weight. And then even if you manage it, it's very difficult to keep that weight off because it's very difficult to keep starving yourself forever without at least some powerful drugs assisting you. And then if you do have some powerful drugs assisting you with starving yourself, then that can lead to some significant problems in its own right, which may be even more significant than being overweight in many cases, most cases, in my opinion. So I hope that we've answered that one already. It's not a great strategy for losing weight to just starve yourself. But what about detoxification? So this is an interesting one because I have this, with clients sometimes, and surprisingly, they're more on. I mean, I've had definitely both. Some of them are like, oh, I've been told to eat every two to 3 hours, and I feel better when I do it, and I kind of have to make the case why that may not be the best idea for them. I mean, every person, every situation is different. But the other side of it is I also have clients often who do it, and I think because they're listening to a bunch of people who say that it is a good idea. And we were talking about this before, and I asked you, Chrissy, have you ever heard the case for why it isn't a good idea? And you said no, or only from me, but not really. So it just goes to show the health people you're listening to, and I don't think the people that you're listening to are particularly niche. And so, it does beg the question, if it's so good, why don't we just do it all the time, right? Like, why aren't, POWs or whatever, the healthiest people around? And in fact, by some metrics, some of them actually were healthier than the average person, interestingly. So there is definitely some benefit to eating less. However, I can say from my personal experience, so between about 2008 and really 2020, and especially 2008 to 2015 I was like vegan. A lot of it was raw vegan, and kind of along with that lifestyle is this lifestyle of fasting. And I would say for between, I think, 2005 and 2021, I would only ever eat 2 meals a day maximum. So I was intermittent fasting every day. I would not eat anything between meals, which I think is part of the intermittent fasting philosophy. And I would frequently not eat a lot at all. I would frequently fast for several days. I've done, 3-day fast, 5-day fast, week. I don't know if I've ever done more than 2 weeks, but I think, so if I were to, estimate the amount of meals that I ate on average over those years, it was probably 1.5 per day.
That's quite
So there was
restrictive, it seems. But I mean, were you getting enough calories then at the same time, or?
that's arguable, but perhaps not. Although, I was always thin, but that was kind of almost irrespective of calorie intake, and I did start to become very thin around 2020, but that was really down more to the digestive issues rather than lack of calories per se. So, was I getting enough nutrients? Arguable. But the point is, I was doing a lot of not eating. And so, based on the philosophy of fasting leads to detoxification, you would think that I would be pure as the driven snow, as it
Yeah,
were.
you should be in tip-top shape.
And so the calorie question, I was never, binging on. I mean, I know vegans can still be unhealthy, but I said raw vegan, so I wasn't having seed oils. I wasn't having a lot of processed foods. I wasn't having, I wasn't binging on high calorie, low nutrition foods in general ever. Probably the least healthy thing I would eat is sometimes I would eat out. I would eat like Indian food or sometimes Ethiopian food, something like that. But even that, it's full of spices and different things. I'm not saying it's necessarily the healthiest cuisine in the world, but it's also not, the absolute most low nutrition processed food in the world either. Um, so I wasn't really taking in a lot of toxicity from food, and I was not eating a lot. And so when I had this health challenge that really showed up in 2019, you were around at the time, Chrissy, and then, got worse and worse. I was pretty surprised to discover that, really that the basis for it was probably actually toxicity. And it's not just that I like fasted, I did other stuff. I did like alkalizing was like a big thing that I did for a while, and juice fasting and all of that kind of things, all of which, I know some viewers are going to say, oh, that's problematic because da, 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 and they may be right. But I did a lot of things that are supposed to support detoxification as well, other than fasting. And I ended up in a position of really fried adrenal glands, really low metabolism, and a really high toxic load. And as specifically shown with my blood lead levels, but also with mycotoxins, and then like a real intolerance to aldehydes or anything that turns into aldehydes. Um, and so I think that's why I have a bit of a personal bias to disbelieving this idea that fasting is this cure-all. And I met these people and spent time with them, and they tend to be very dogmatic as well. I mean, vegan people, in my experience as having been one and being around them all the time, are very dogmatic. But I would say the pro-fasting people as well are very dogmatic. And one of the things they talk a lot about is how good they feel and how energized they feel. And I'll be honest, that wasn't me most of the time. I didn't feel super energized, and I do believe that some people do. But I don't really think it's because food is such a burden to a body. I just think their adrenal system wasn't as fried as mine, and so they get a good increase in catecholamines, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and then also cortisol, which leaves them kind of flying high and feeling good as a short-term boost in those neurotransmitters generally does. And I think people mistake that for
Energy.
like actual energy. I mean, it is energy. I suppose it is actual energy. But what it is it's supposed to be temporary emergency energy,
Yeah, it's not regenerative at all.
it's not sustainable over medium to long periods of time. And I think that is really where the key challenge lies.
Right. Okay. And so, along your journey of discovering this, have you been able to find out why your body was showing so much more toxicity in it, even though you were fasting or having these longer times of not eating?
Yeah, and I think there is a genetic component to it. So, I said about the high lead, and of course, I discovered about my propensity for that from Advanced Health Genetics, formerly Genetic Insights, that service. And, I do recommend that to everyone to find out how good they are at detoxification. There's all kinds of reports about, and what I found actually for me, though, is that really wasn't, although it explained the lead, it didn't explain in general why my body was struggling. Like, generally, my capacity for detoxification was actually good overall, according to my genetics. And sure enough, now I've been doing more of what I would call the right things. I seem to have a very good tolerance to most levels of toxicity. I recently had to have some, quite powerful and liver straining medications as a result of having a dry socket after having a root canal extracted, which I talked about in a recent episode. And, when you're doing that, they're like, oh, be careful because it can raise liver enzymes. And they were fine in my case. So I'm not like, and I didn't feel bad on them. But I did a few years ago. I had to have the same thing a few years ago when I had the other one removed, and I did feel bad at that time. So at that time, it felt like, oh God, it was another toxin my body couldn't cope with. This time it was like, it's all right. It's no big deal. So I feel like I'm going more and more to what is genetically normal for me. And but for some people, that's not the case. For some people, I see it in their genetics. They're super sensitive to a bunch of stuff. We look at their genetics, and sure enough, like they struggle to deal with toxins well compared to the average person, and that is a root cause. But it wasn't for me. I think rather than talk about me more, if I go a little bit into the fit, like I want to make the case of both sides, because both sides are right to some degree. So just very simply, does fasting help your body detoxify? Yes or no? I want to do a little bit of a argument to support both sides, but then don't worry, I won't be Mr. Sitting in the middle. By the end of it, I will come to an actual conclusion. And of course, it does depend a bit on you, like quite a bit in many cases, but I won't give a completely fence-sitting, well, it totally depends on. So I'll give some general guidelines at the end of it as to, what's the medium path, and then also how to be able to tell what is true for you to a reasonable degree. So I think I'll do that first, Chrissy, and then if you remind me before we finish, I'll go back to answering the question what it actually was for me, rather than give that away, because I don't like talking about myself too much. And I've got a few studies here prepared as well. I had 2 different documents. I can only find one, but it's okay. I've still got half a dozen here. I think that'll do. But yeah, so this has got like this document's got the key points here, and that I've got in front of me, that make the case for and against, I think. So let's do the case for first, because just because my personal experience is my personal experience doesn't mean I'm going to throw all like objective evidence out of the window. That's what I think people do so much. They generalize from their own experience and then go, well,
It worked
therefore
for
it must be
me.
true from everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. The most common one I hear all the time is all you got to do is eat a healthy diet and then you'll be healthy, whatever their version of a healthy diet is. And I think I said this in a recent episode. I used to wonder why they'd say something so stupid that's so obviously not true if you actually, talk to and investigate a diverse range of people, especially people struggling with their health, many of whom are following that diet very well and still suffering with all these issues. But I realized eventually that they're just generalizing, or I think the NLP term is globalizing from their own experience. So their experience is when they eat well, they don't have any symptoms. When they eat badly, they start to get symptoms. And so that must be all there is to it. And then they generalize that or globalize that to everyone else. I don't want to do that with fasting and detoxification. That's why I wanted to do this episode, partly for my own benefit, to really research both sides and see what the validity was. So let's do the pro side, like I said. So the pro is that basically, as you mentioned the word already, autophagy. There's also mitophagy. And so what that word means in a nutshell, auto means, to yourself, and phagy means to break down. So it is the self-breaking down. That's the idea. So basically, and I say that just to help people remember what the word means. It's often how I remember what these complicated words mean. And so the primary benefit to fasting that's normally talked about of autophagy, and mitophagy is just the same thing, but with your mitochondria, to help them to be broken down and recycled is the idea. And so why does that recycling take place? Basically because your body is low in fuel. That's the idea. And so it starts breaking down your cells and the mitochondria within your cells to its constituent parts, which would be things like amino acids, which are then available to your body to actually utilize. That's the idea. So recycle, reuse this source of potential nutrients. So, and in the meantime, there's several benefits to that. Number one, not all cells are functioning well. And if your autophagy systems are working well, that what they should be doing is breaking down the cells that are not working well first. There is this idea of senescent cells, or the cell danger response, where basically some cells stop functioning properly, but they also resist recycling. And
The
so when
couch
you
potatoes, they're just kind of sitting there taking up space and eating the food.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a complicated theory. Yeah, they are using up nutrients to some degree, but to some degree, they're closing their walls off to input and output, so less nutrients coming in, also less excretion. It's like we talk a lot about the nervous system, how it has three modes, and one of them is to go into this freeze state. Well, it turns out that the cells actually can do the same thing. They go into this kind of freeze state, also where their membrane, their barriers become less permeable. So they're basically, they are less connected to the outside, and so they're kind of more than just useless. They're actually kind of hurting because all cells are supposed to work together, and these are just unresponsive. So it creates a real problem to the body. It's one of the theories of what causes aging and disease is these senescent cells, and of course, especially if you're a fan of that theory, you're especially going to like the idea of fasting and breaking that up. So that's really important. So yes, that autophagy happens, and it does happen. Um, and in the process of recycling to liberate this nutrition from maybe a survival point of view, the idea is it's breaking down the cells that don't work, and it's also clearing out the content of these cells because, and this is more controversial, but it's generally among people who like fasting, they would generally agree with this, that these cells often aren't senescent for no reason. They're senescent because they are overloaded with some kind of toxicity, which maybe would include some kind of pathogenic toxicity, but there's something in there that is stopping it working correctly. And so as the body's recycling that, it's also able to then get rid of whatever toxin it is, whether it's lead or whether it's a mycotoxin or whether it's an excess of some kind of amino acid or whatever. It could be all kinds of metabolic byproducts. There's loads of things it could be, but whatever it is, it's helping to clear that out by breaking down the cell. So that's the theory. There's definitely lots of studies that show this is the case. Got a study here, 2010, short-term fasting induces profound neuronal autophagy. So this is a good one, especially because, neurons, that's the brain. This process is especially important everywhere, but especially in the central nervous system, you could argue it's, extremely important that every cell is functioning correctly, that every cell is not overloaded or clogged with, toxicity that stops it working correctly. So, this is good. Interestingly, this is looking at short-term fasting, so a day or two. And this is a pattern that I started to notice, which is a little bit of a spoiler, but looking at the benefits of fasting, it tended to be more the shorter term fasting that I saw had, studies showing it being effective. Now, talking about shorter term, another study here, system-wide benefits of intermeal fasting by autophagy, cell metabolism, 2014. So basically, intermittent fasting enhances liver and fat tissue detox specifically. So we just talked about the nervous system, but the liver is super important as well. And I think you talked in a recent episode about you wanted to hear more about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, Chrissy. Maybe there'll be a full episode on that at some point soon. But for now, here's one thing. Absolutely, if you fast, among other things, and it's the among other things that may be problematic, but among other things, your body absolutely does start to break down fat as a fuel source. That often liberates the toxins that are, well, if it happens, then it does liberate the toxins that are being stored in there. And often that fat that's being broken down is being removed from a place that you really don't want it, like in the liver, for instance, or, like in the abdominal cavity in general with, like visceral fat. So breaking down that fatty tissue, liberating the toxicity for the body to deal with can be a beneficial thing. I say it that way. I'll explain why it might not be when I do the anti side, but it certainly can be. This study looked at when we talk about fat soluble toxins, I often talk about mycotoxins most, but this one looked at PCBs, which are often found in anything kind of contaminated by seawater would be one of them. So seafood's definitely one example. But anyway, it's toxic. It stops your cells working properly. It tends to be stored in the body's fatty deposits. And intermittent fasting, so that's basically just skipping one meal and not stuffing your face between meals, really not very difficult. As I said, I did it like accidentally for 15 years. It has been shown to be effective at that. Another study here, 2018, the effects of fasting or calorie restriction on autophagy induction. I'll do it again. On autophagy induction, a review of the literature. So this was a meta-study in Aging Research Reviews. And it showed across tissues, liver, muscle, and brain especially were focused on. Fasting induces autophagy markers, breaking down damaged mitochondria that hoard reactive oxygen species. This supports excretion by kidneys and bile. Now, when I hear that, I think can be good, but again, so it's mitophagy. It's breaking down the mitochondria that perhaps aren't functioning as well as they should. Okay, good. But it's releasing a bunch of reactive oxygen species into the system, probably lymph and then blood for, as it said there when I was reading out, for the kidneys and the liver to deal with. So good if the level that it's releasing your liver and kidneys are able to deal with, right? Which, in many cases they are, as in this study, it saw it as overall a good thing. This one I thought was interesting in this article supporting the benefits of fasting. That mentioned this study, excretion of heavy metals and glyphosate in urine and hair before and after long-term fasting in humans. And they noticed that after a long-term fast, a 10-day fast, urinary arsenic, nickel, and lead in the hair actually went down.
That's surprising.
Well, is it? So it leads almost nicely into the other side. They were positing this as a showing that the body has less of it. Like it's gone down because the body has run out of anything to excrete. That's how they chose to interpret the data, which again just shows it really depends.
That doesn't really tell you one way or the other what it is. Has it gone down or has it done less?
Yes, exactly. Whereas I would say the opposite, like if you were fasting, like genuinely fasting, which it seems they were in this study, and your, arsenic, lead, whatever, doubled at the end versus the beginning, you would hope that that's not because you're just intaking more if you're fasting. So that really would indicate, the body is excreting more. This is what I mean about studies where you really have to actually check like the fine print a little bit. Look, I didn't make them all spurious ones. I only did 1 out of 4, and it was just from this one article which was promoting fasting, but I just thought it was interesting that's the challenge of how it's easy to cherry pick, or not even cherry picking data. It's really just taking data, let's take it at face value, and interpreting it in a way which supports your particular point that you're trying to make. So that's the argument for it. And other than, I just picked on that last one a little bit, but I don't actually argue with any of that. I agree that not eating will increase autophagy. I agree that not eating will increase mitophagy. I agree that it will do that in areas where it's extremely important to have well-functioning cells not burned by toxicity, like the nervous system, like the liver, like the muscle, like the heart. And I agree that there will be a tendency to break down fatty tissues specifically, including, again, in areas where we really don't want them to build up, like in the abdominal cavity, like in the liver specifically. But, in most areas of the body, we don't want an excess level of fat. So I agree with all of that. I think all of that is relevant. So, does that sum up, Chrissy, the pro-fasting argument that you've heard, or do you think I'm leaving out any key points here? Hey, quick question. Do you tend to think about food throughout the day? Have you ever finished a full meal and still felt like you could eat another plate full 20 minutes later? Now, I know this is controversial to say, but the truth is, it's actually not your fault if this is you. You're not greedy, you're not undisciplined, you're actually leptin resistant, and you're not alone. Leptin resistance is a consequence of living a modern lifestyle of excess blue light, excess stress, not enough sleep, and chemical food additives, among other things. It is the number one reason so many people, especially in their 40s and 50s, feel hungry 24/7 and can't shift the weight no matter what they try. Hi, I'm Elwin Robinson from the Rejuvenate podcast, and I've just launched the leptin balance formula as part of the new Hormetics weight optimization system. It's the first system that identifies your exact hormonal block, whether it be leptin, insulin, cortisol, estrogen, low metabolism, or often some combination of those, and it gives you the precise formula to fix it. Now, the leptin balance formula contains African mango, Ceylon cinnamon, and alpha lipoic acid, all chosen because studies show they help restore leptin sensitivity and thereby reduce appetite naturally. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin, order now, and you'll be invited to join our clinical study the moment you check out at no extra cost, so you can track exactly how well it works for you and help prove to the world that it does actually work. So go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin now and use code REJUVENATE for 20% off. You deserve to feel satisfied again. That's advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin and use code REJUVENATE for 20% off now.
No, I mean, I think that definitely does sum it up. It's basically the longer you do it, or from the people that I've been listening to, the longer that you do it, you get into these deeper states of autophagy that really kick in, and it's, here. But when I'm talking longer states, I'm talking, it's 24 hours, 36, 72, different areas. But no, I think that's a pretty good overview.
Yeah, and you're talking about degrees and all the rest of it, but it's still the same basic thing, right? Yeah. Okay, awesome. I just didn't want to feel like I'd left out a central argument to why it's a good thing. All right. So, and this is where I was happy to do some research because I had a few ideas about why it's not a good idea. Some of them, it seemed, were very valid. Some of them less so, according to the research that I did. So I'll share, all the theories here that I have about why it may not be a good idea, and then I'll evaluate them critically. So here's the crux of the crux of the pro-fasting argument is it is probably the best mechanism to break down and clear out cells. That's me saying it in one sentence. So I'd say the crux of the fasting isn't actually necessarily always a good idea argument is that detoxification is an energy and nutrient expensive process. And that if you are doing it, especially in a situation where you're already nutrient and or energy deficient, it can potentially shut down or reduce the level of detoxification and make it worse. That's one argument. Another argument is, well, because what the pro side says is true, meaning fasting is such an effective mechanism of forcing autophagy, whether your body really wants to or not, because it's just breaking cells down to try and get some desperately needed nutrients, you may well be flooded. And I say you, I mean your lymph, your blood, your liver and kidneys, and because of your blood, really potentially every organ, because the blood goes to every organ, could be being overloaded with toxicity because the liver and the kidneys are not able to deal with them. The lymph is too clogged and is not able to move them. Maybe even the pores of the skin are too clogged and not able to excrete them very well. Maybe even, the intestines are too clogged. The person is overly constipated and is not able to move them out well enough or quickly enough. And so then you get into several different potentially bad situations. Number one is that the organs and channels of elimination are overloaded. This can be seen in the extreme in signs like liver enzymes being elevated, kidney EGFR score being lowered, In terms of most obvious kind of blood tests, and inflammatory markers be increased. Like a CRP, for instance. Sometimes if the person's body has a tendency to be a reactive and immune sense, they may have raised IgE, raised eosinophils, they may have raised histamine, increased mast cell activation, all of that kind of thing. Because again, the body is just overloaded, and when it's overloaded with toxins in general, if there are some types of toxins that it particularly has an immune reaction to, there'll be more of those toxins floating around on average, and it may already be debilitated by dealing with other toxins, and so then the toxins that it has a specific reaction to, it has a stronger reaction to. So all of those are considerations. There is I know I haven't got to one sentence yet. Hopefully I'll manage to do that at the end. So there is the issue of nutrient deficiency. Why this matters is there are certain nutrients that are very important for detoxification, and they're not necessarily the same nutrients that your body is easily going to liberate in the process of breaking down cells. So you may well be, there's certain amino acids, like the ones that make up glutathione, for instance, like glycine and methionine and glutamine, that you may have a deficiency of. There's various vitamins, various minerals, like selenium, for instance, or zinc, even potassium, that are required for the process of phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification, especially, which if you're already low, and why wouldn't you be if you are overloaded with all these cells that aren't working properly, and maybe your digestion doesn't work very well, and maybe your hormones aren't working optimally, and you're eating the wrong kind of food, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then you can take a bad situation and make it worse. And so to answer your earlier question I didn't answer about me, I certainly think that was one of the things going on. That I was already low in some of the nutrients. For instance, as a vegan, I was probably lower in zinc than average, which I was aware of and tried supplementing with, but still, I see an argument now that I was still low in it despite that. And I wasn't, consistent the whole time with supplementing it. So that's another argument. And then the third argument, and this is specifically favored by the pro-metabolic portion of my fan base, audience, whatever you want to call it, who love Ray Peat much more than me, I'm sure, is the idea that you want a fast metabolism to produce more energy, to have the ATP being produced in abundant qualities by your cells. But the thing is, when you eat less, your body goes into a hibernation, or at the very least temporary, we don't have enough food mode, and it slows down the metabolism. And then when it slows down the metabolism, there's less energy available. When there's less energy available, that means there's less energy available for the liver, for the kidneys, for the circulatory system, for all these systems, the immune system, all these things that we just talked about, which means it could be harder for your body to detoxify. And then let's say the fourth and last argument against why detoxification, why fasting is helpful and beneficial for detoxification, is because fasting increases stress chemicals, as we talked about. Inevitably. In fact, even just having less of a certain macronutrient like carbohydrate, let alone fasting, will significantly increase the level of cortisol and noradrenaline, especially because those are required in order to increase the process of autophagy, ironically. So, what is autophagy? Is that breaking down the stuff? It's a catabolic process as opposed to an anabolic process. Catabolism means to break down, anabolism means to build up. So that catabolic process requires those stress chemicals to be elevated in order to actually work. So that would be the fourth argument against fasting actually improving detoxification. So those are the 4 theories. So then I looked into it. What I found is, I'll start with the last one I just said, I guess, first. To be honest, the only evidence I could really find for, I've got this one here. Let's do ATP. For ATP production going down is more for medium to longer term fasting. So we're talking several days to several weeks. And especially when you go several weeks fasting, which could mean either, no calories at all, or even just, very reduced intake. There absolutely are studies, there's evidence that it will significantly reduce the basal metabolic rate, which will then slow down phase 2 detoxification specifically. And of course, there's lots of studies and evidence showing that not eating will slow down metabolism, but I struggled a little bit finding it that it specifically slowed down the function of the liver and the kidney. But I did get one here. This is from 2024, Scientific Reports, analysis of physiological and biochemical changes and metabolic shifts during 21-day fasting hypometabolism. And the reason I'm reading them out, we'll put the links in the description as usual, but you can also, if you're listening, you can just type it into your browser as you're listening, and the study will tend to come up if you copy in the title as I'm saying them. So that was definite evidence of that. The evidence that it might happen in, 12 or 18 hours of not eating, though, I'll be honest, it was sparse. The conclusion I came to is it really depends on the metabolic flexibility of the person. And I think this makes actually a big difference as to, like, the people who are promoting fasting as a health-giving thing, especially, intermittent fasting or skipping the odd day or all the rest of it. If you look at them, they're often healthy. Now, you might say, well, Elwin, that's what I want to be. So that's great. That's perfect. But here's the thing. What I'm actually saying is they're often young and they're often healthy. I think I told the story before about the worst health advice I ever got was from someone who referred someone to me, and they gave a load of advice, which was, actually it was a bunch of, extremely long-term fast and all this stuff that had absolutely not worked and made me worse. And when I pointed this out to them, they were like, look, I know what I'm talking about. I've never been sick a day in my life. And this is the thing. When you've never been sick a day in your life, why would you have never been sick a day in your life? Probably a combination of good DNA, good environment, and, relative lack of abuse. Because the truth is, if you basically live healthy in most ways and you fasting all the time, you're better off than what the average person does, who's drinking, maybe smoking, breathing poor quality air, putting unpleasant cosmetics and skin products on themselves. And most people are just absolutely inundating themselves with toxicity. So this person, I'm thinking in general, they were like in a healthy environment, in a healthy climate, with healthy lifestyle, outdoors a lot, sunshine, a bunch of stuff. Relatively relaxed person who, was so convinced they're right. They didn't seem to have a huge amount of stress. And when you have so many things going for you, you can abuse your body in a lot of ways and you'll still be totally fine. So that's the other thing I would say is, and if you're listening to this and you're 25 and you've never been sick a day in your life, it's almost certainly the case that you can fast whenever you want and you'll be totally fine and it'll be beneficial. But the question is that you? How metabolically flexible are you? How easily can your metabolism snap back into being in a faster, optimal mode as soon as you start eating again? And I'd say that's potentially the challenge with that. But anyway, in terms of what the studies show, basically the longer the fast is for, the more likely you are to have that not just temporary slowdown of metabolism and mitochondrial energy creation, and more likely to have a problem. Then the issue with stress chemicals, again, the same thing. The short-term rise in cortisol and noradrenaline, it really is, as I said, part of the whole process of autophagy. You can't get around it. And so to say that it is bad is like to say that autophagy is bad. Like they're really one and the same. But looking into it, when it is over a long time and repeatedly, and that cortisol starts to stay chronically high, that's where you tend to have a lot more problems. That's where all the negative side effects of high cortisol, which we've talked about many times before, and we're probably going to talk about soon again, because we're going to do a hormetics episode all about cortisol, so I won't go into it now, but you've probably heard it before. So like all the bad stuff about high cortisol kicks in if you keep doing it for a long period of time and doing it again and again and again. That's really the crux of that one. So far out of my arguments, 2 out of 4, I realize that's only really for medium to long-term fasting in most people. Starting to get a little bit, oh God, maybe I might be wrong. But I definitely found the most evidence around the idea of nutrient depletion being an issue. This is the key thing. So when you are already low in certain nutrient precursors, you absolutely are at risk of depleting the specific components like glutathione, like sulfation, glucuronidation, superoxide dismutase, even all of these things that the body uses to help to address and clear up and deal with these toxins. And by the way, the research I looked into was only really talked about this in terms of phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, because I think the concept of phase 3 detoxification is not as well known. But I just want to slip that in as well, that if you're doing like a pure fast, like a water fast, or even a juice fast, say, or something like that, and you're specifically not including fiber, and really that's, if we're talking about fasting, that's usually what it is. It's removing fiber, because juice is often considered still okay, or coconut water, or whatever. It's like, removing fiber and I guess fat and significant protein that's generally considered to be the key to what is a real fast. Well, that fiber is, or other binders like charcoal or whatever, are extremely important to stop those toxins from being part of intrahepatic circulation. So meaning once your body has dealt with all of these toxins that have been released into circulation through the breakdown, through autophagy, if you are not binding them with either fiber in the diet or some other kind of professional binder like charcoal or clay or something like that, then most of them are going to be reabsorbed through the small intestine, go right back into the liver and the bloodstream for them to have to deal with all over again. So that's another point that I didn't see made in any of the studies that I found. But anyway, back to the actual studies. It makes a really big difference if your body doesn't have enough of those nutrients to do the phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. That's what they looked at. I actually think there's more to it than that, but I understand that that's where their focus was more limited to. I mean, talked a lot about glutathione and stuff, but I'm thinking, well, what about coenzyme Q10, and what about a lot of these things that kind of play a protective role of stopping the body being overly stressed out by all of these compounds that may have been safely tucked away in like fat tissue or bone, even, in the case of things like lead and cadmium and stuff like that, like some people have, like myself. It's not ideal to have lead or cadmium in your bones, but it's a hell of a lot better than having the exact same amount of lead in your bloodstream, which will actually kill you usually if that quantity was all released at once. So that doesn't happen, but if it were, and ditto, all the toxicity that's in the fat, if it were all released at once, it would again kill you. So I think there's a bit of idealism with the idea of fasting, that, and maybe even a bit of, ironically, even though often the fasting proponents are fiercely anti-mainstream, they seem to have somehow still kind of fixed on this mainstream idea that detoxification isn't a big deal and that your body can just deal with any amount of toxins, at least some of them. Now, some of them don't say that, and they recommend all kinds of other stuff, right? They do recommend binders, and they do recommend like certain nutrients that you take before, during, and after a fast and all the rest of it. I don't mean to, but I would say that's the least you're looking at. If you're looking to fast and you want to go to some fasting guru about, to give you motivation, I guess, because it's not easy to not eat, to stick to not eating. Make sure they know what they're talking about. Make sure they understand at least everything I just said here, because I'm not Mr. Fasting expert. I'm just doing an episode on it. Make sure they understand at least all of this, and make sure that they are like on top of a before, during, and after protocol that supports these processes. Don't autophagy isn't a magic process. It's not waving a magic wand over you and all the toxins just poof, and all the cells that don't work properly just poof, disappear. No, they're broken down. And yes, some of what's broken down is usable as fuel or material for building new cells. But if that were all that was there, it wouldn't need breaking down in the first place. There's a bunch of dysfunctional stuff in there as well that is being broken down and released into circulation. And that really needs to be addressed. And so, yeah.
Okay. I mean, so those are great overviews. I know you just discussed the nutrient depletion one, which definitely, especially for the conversations that we've had, sounds like the biggest one that would, catch me up, because if your body doesn't have those nutrients, it can't function correctly. And as you just said as well, too, that detoxification is an energy and nutrient heavy process.
Yes. And to get back, thank you. And to get back to the energy point, if your body's mitochondrial energy creation is working pretty well, which actually, I talked to Dr. Mira about this, like the people she sees, it almost never is. Like she's done so many tests of people's mitochondria, and the surprise is usually how are these people still functioning, not like anything else, which is very different from, a lot of the time you go to a doctor and they do your blood tests and they say, oh, you're fine, even though you feel like crap. But this is kind of the other way around. When we look at people's mitochondria, like, oh my God, I'm amazed they're still able to do what they do. And I think I was in that category to some degree when my mitochondria was tested too. Be interested to see how it changed now. I'm going to get around to doing that. But anyway, so the idea that there's always this assumption with these things that, well, if you're healthy, it's fine. But the thing is, who's fasting who's already healthy? Now, there is that small percentage of people. They do it for spiritual reasons, religious reasons. They do it for, heroic reasons. They want to prove to themselves they can push themselves far, like the Wim Hof types, all of that kind of things. Sure. But I think a lot of the people who are doing this are people who are struggling with their health, and they're doing it because they want to feel better, as was my motivation. And so I think for me, it took me from someone who was struggling and whose metabolism's already not working very well, whose mitochondria are already not producing enough ATP, etc. And then it just made it worse. And I don't think I'm the only one. And so I really, and I'm going to give a more nuanced answer than this, but first of all, just in terms of personalization, in terms of is it right for me rather than a general answer, I would really put fasting in the same category as extreme cold exposure. Speaking of Wim Hof earlier, is it beneficial? It totally depends if your body is able to adapt to it successfully or not. That's the thing that, to me, it has in common that puts it in the same category. You get a bunch of people who do it, who feel fantastic. With cold exposure, I won't do a whole thing on that, but there are certainly some chronic health and well-being, like mental health issues that people have that intense cold exposure will really help with. That's 100% true. And, there's thousands, millions of people, testimonials like this changed my life, this reversed it when no one else could, and all the rest of it. And there's something similar for fasting. But we have to understand that that's only if your main issue is, So in the case of cold exposure, I'd say it's only if your main issue is an excessive inflammatory response, just to really simplify it for a second. And in the case of detoxification, I'd say it's only if your main issue is an excessive toxin buildup. If your main issue and your only significant issue is an excessive toxin buildup, then fasting is miraculous because you have enough energy to deal with the release of toxins once it happens. You have enough nutrients to deal with the release of toxins once it happens. You have enough stress resilience to deal with the release of toxins once it happens. All you need is for those damn toxins to be released and got out of your body, right? That's great. And if you're in that position, then it's wonderful. But what about if you're not in that position? And then it depends. If your main issue is high toxins and you have a bit of issue with a hormonal imbalance or a bit of issue of nutrient deficiency, maybe it's still beneficial overall because you can mitigate that, well enough, and your thyroid or your cortisol will bounce back all right, or even your blood glucose and your insulin from not eating, it'll bounce back, it's fine. Yes, okay, you're depleting yourself of even more nutrients temporarily, but then clearing those out then means that your absorption of nutrients is better afterwards, and so overall it's worth it. It becomes a bit of a judgment call. Where I get really concerned, though, is when people are really struggling. When I see people who are obviously severely nutrient deficient or severely in a state of chronic sympathetic fight or flight dominance, or a case of severe psychological trauma or whatever, severe infection even, and it can help with infection, but it can make it worse for all the reasons that we've just talked about. And then they're doing this, and then they're making themselves worse. I'd say out of all of the examples I could list, though, from Rejuvenate Blueprint, of course, probably the biggest ones based on the evidence is that nutrients. It's the people who are severely or significantly, let's just say, depleted in nutrition, are really rolling the dice when it comes to any kind of fasting, and certainly extended fasting.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And then you might have some people, when maybe they're new to the podcast, and maybe they would be like, well, how would I know?
Yeah, great question. Test, don't guess. You can, if you have to guess, you can also guess based on symptomology. Ideally, I recommend genetics first because you get such a vast amount of information for such a low price. And then from there, it gives all the clues you need as to what, if anything, may be worth, doing further testing on. Just, as we're talking about nutrients, I've seen some people, for instance, with genetic risk of only being depleted in 3 nutrients. I've seen other people who have a genetic risk of being depleted in over 30. And that makes a huge difference. And I can see it. The ones who are, have the genetic tendency to be depleted in lots of different nutrients, they're obsessed with food and nutrition, often. And the ones who are not, don't even think about it. Like, they've come to me for something else. Like, it's not even on their radar to worry about what they're eating or how nutritious it is or whatever. And so there's a genetic basis for it. And then of course there's other things as well. I suppose the most obvious answer to the question, Chrissy, is just like, how much are you struggling? But some more specific things would be if you're underweight, it's definitely far riskier. So the classic case of someone who's just overloaded with toxicity, and this is definitely a generalization, there are loads of exceptions, but they are overweight. So if you're underweight, you may still be overloaded with toxicity, but that's not your only problem or your core problem, I would say, in most cases. You've got something else going on. Now, say underweight, right? BMI of 19 or less as a, if you want something specific as a generalization. And so that was one of the mistakes I made. If you generally feel colder than the people around you, that's a sign to me of that you should think very carefully about fasting. If you are generally more highly strung or anxious or neurotic or easily upset than the people around you, that's a sign that you should be very careful around. If you are more strongly affected by drugs, whether it be tea or coffee or cocaine or heroin or whatever it might be, if all of those things have a much stronger impact on you than other people, then that would point to me as a sign of both, maybe toxin overload and central nervous system sensitivity, which both indicate a potential to have a worse experience than fasting. So that's a few kind of things. Much better, though, would be to actually test and find out specifically what's going on with you, as we talk about always on this podcast. Do you ever get to mid or late afternoon, and even though you've only had lunch maybe 1, 2, 3 hours ago, you just get this overwhelming craving for something sweet? Well, if that's you, it's not weakness, it's not lack of discipline, it's actually likely to be an early sign of insulin resistance. Hi, I'm Elwin Robinson from the Rejuvenate podcast. I've just released the insulin balance formula, which is part of the Hormetic's weight optimization system. The insulin balance formula contains precisely chosen quantities of berberine, fenugreek, zinc, and folate, all chosen because studies show that these quantities of these precise ingredients help your cells to listen to insulin again, stopping these blood sugar crashes and finally helping your body burn fat instead of storing it. To try it, go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/insulin, and as soon as you order, you'll be invited to join our clinical study at no extra cost, so you can track exactly how much better you feel and help us show that the formula actually works. Plus, you can get 20% off now by using the code Rejuvenate. End the blood sugar roller coaster, lose that belly fat. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/insulin and use code Rejuvenate for 20% off now.
Yeah, as we've discussed, it's been an eye opener, not just for me, but for many others. So, I'm not sure if this is the right point to go back, but I just want to also say thank you for those pros and cons, because you really listed those as well. The cons to give us a pause or a thought to go, oh, well, actually, do I have too much stress, or am I nutrient deficient, or, am I struggling with my energy? Is my thyroid production low? Or what is happening with me? And is this the right course of action to address the issue that I'm having? So, I mean, that's what I like about this. So when we have these discussions, because you could listen to a podcast or to another doctor and they say, this is the answer, this is a thing. You go, yeah, that sounds amazing. Wait, hang on a minute. Let me check with myself. Let me just ask a few more questions before I dive in. Because in the past, that's who I was. I was like, oh yeah, that's it. It's all in. I was going to do that thing, and a lot of times, not for my benefit.
No. And look up the term confirmation bias to really understand these people. A lot of them are well-meaning. If I were to criticize them, it's that they tend to be kind of dismissive to the people who say this isn't working for me. That, the classic thing is, oh, you must be doing it wrong. But some of them aren't even doing that. Some of them just stick their head in the sand and completely ignore it. So I gave the kind of personalization answer. I did promise at the beginning I was going to give a general answer about whether fasting helps with detoxification. So let's say if I must give a general one, which I think I will because I promised, and I know people hate it totally depends kind of conclusion.
Yeah.
Even though it's true.
Yeah.
So let's give a really, really general answer. Intermittent fasting. So eating 2 good-sized meal that meet your calorie needs within an 8-hour window. And I would say preferably in the first half of the day, and then not eating again till the next morning, I would say is the golden compromise that gets the best of all worlds. So eat breakfast within an hour or two of waking up. Eat again when you're hungry. If you had a very satiating meal, that would be 6 to 8 hours later. When I say satiating, full of calories, full of micronutrients, full of nutrition. Eat again 6 to 8 hours later, and then don't have an evening meal. That seems to be the golden recipe to lower insulin resistance, to lose weight if it's sustainable. It's not always sustainable. We'll talk about that in the different Hormetics weight loss episodes. But if you really want to fast lose weight, that's the meal to skip. It is the last one. I know that some people say that this is not proven. First of all, I disagree with that. There's always studies that can prove everything. But just look at logic. Logically, if you eat at the end of the day, you have a load of calories just before you go to sleep, is your body more likely to store it as fat than if you have it in the morning when you're about to do a bunch of stuff and burn a bunch of calories. It's just logical. And I find it in practice absolutely works out. When clients just skip that last meal, they lose so much more weight, so much more fat specifically. But it's not only good for that reason. If you skip that last meal, then that means that between, lunchtime and the next morning, you will be in a state of autophagy. And again, as much as you don't want to be filling up on calories just before you sleep, when is the time that your body's probably in the best position to deal with all those toxins being released? When you're asleep, right? Like, you could say, well, it might disturb your sleep, which is true, but still, it's like, well, when's a better time? Like, it is the time that your body is most equipped to deal with it. It's when the body is naturally doing autophagy anyway. It's when the body is naturally doing the process of detoxification to a larger degree anyway. So to me, that's the golden compromise. I'm not saying that everyone should do it all the time, but I'm saying if you want to do it, that's the way to do it. Now, I say that, and look at how many people won't do it that way. And I just want to address why. Because they're addicted to stress. Like, it feels so good to many people in many ways to skip breakfast, and it feels so bad to skip dinner, right? Skipping breakfast, why is that? Because when you skip breakfast, you're in a more adrenalized state. It helps you to get stuff done. I get it. That's why people like it. Or, they just have coffee or whatever. That will help even more to raise all the stress chemicals. And then at the end of the day, in order to relax, they want to eat. When you eat, it turns off the cortisol and adrenaline. All the things that we were just talking about turns on the more calming part of the nervous system, and it helps you relax. But here's the thing: if you're using not eating as a kind of stimulant, and if you're using eating as a sedative, you have not resolved your health issues, because food should be fuel. Food should be energy. When you eat, you should feel more energy. When you don't eat, you should feel less energy overall. This is just logical. And yes, I realize, and the fasting proponents will say, but digestion is a very energy utilizing process. I understand that. A lot of blood flow goes to like the digestive organs, but it's not really, you're still getting more calories than you're burning. It's not really energy utilizing. That's the metaphor that they use to describe this subjective experience. The reality is that it's simply calming. It's calming to eat. It's calming and energizing to eat. And so if you are not eating in the morning, then it means you're running on stress. And you're much more likely, and you don't believe me, you can see this for yourself, to be stressed. You're much more likely to be angry. You're much more likely to be irritated. You're much more likely to be upset. You're much more likely to be anxious. You're much more likely to have all kinds of issues. And I didn't prepare for this, but there are so many studies showing that. The correlation between bad mood and low blood sugar.
Oh, completely. I bet there are.
Yeah.
I mean, in my personal experience, when we were doing the episode with the chronometer back a little while ago, and we were talking about eating, for that fuel. And I really did notice if I went too long, my mood changed. I was more irritable. I came home. I was just like, and I was like, I just need to eat. I need to eat. That's all it is. I'm like, oh my God, amazing.
It's amazingly true. Absolutely, yeah. And so there's abundant studies to prove this when it comes to blood sugar specifically. But I'd say related to stress chemicals as well. Like, is it a surprise that people are more likely to be angry or even violent when their adrenaline is high, than when they're not high? I mean, it's the most obvious thing in the world. Well, what raises adrenaline? Not eating.
Yeah, and on another episode recently, I think you said something about people sentenced before lunch or after lunch, and they were.
That's my favorite study.
Yeah, that was good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was judges giving much harsher sentences to people before lunch than after lunch. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest myth I want to dispel, the idea that fasting is energizing. It is subjectively energizing because it is stress chemical spiking. Now, I don't want to make people wrong. There is a certain subset of people who justifiably feel better when they raise their adrenaline and their noradrenaline and their cortisol. But that's an issue that needs resolving. As much as any hormonal balance or neurochemical imbalance needs resolving. To be honest, for someone like that, I would prefer that they would have a stimulant, whether it's caffeine or modafinil or any of these other kind of wakefulness promoters after eating breakfast, of course, not before, because then it spikes the stress chemicals too much. I prefer that strategy. Then I would prefer the strategy of not eating, because then at least your body has the fuel, it has the nutrients that it needs in order to function optimally. And then if temporarily, until you resolve the issue, you spike the level of the wakefulness chemicals with some kind of substance. To me, that's the better strategy than not eating. But it's especially a bad idea to do both, to not eat and then drink caffeine or whatever it might be to spike the adrenal chemicals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And many people are already doing that. Yeah. Yeah. You did mention, or I asked you earlier at the beginning, about what it was that you found specifically for you. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more, or have we?
I think I largely do it during, but I can
Yeah.
summarize.
If you summarize, because I mean, Isabel, those 4 points that were really, really great. But yeah, if you could summarize it for us in your personal experience, that would be lovely.
Yeah, I think my metabolism was already low for a long period of time, even before that phase of my life, probably due to actually excess stress, probably is the primary thing, which I have a genetic tendency for. And then I had a stressful environment and traumatic childhood and all that kind of stuff. So I think over time, when you have that high stress, it lowers your metabolism. So I think I already had a low metabolism. I think, I had a diet, I was vegetarian my whole life until I was in my mid-30s. So I think I had a diet deficient in certain nutrients like zinc, maybe, B vitamins as well, choline, various things. And so I think that probably led me to try these things in the first place. And while there was some benefit, like, I reduced my toxic intake massively by no longer smoking, drinking, taking drugs, and eating processed food. That was all good. But my main problem wasn't excess toxins, although it was a problem. My main problem was probably hormonal imbalance, primarily with low thyroid function, excessive adrenal function. And then secondarily as well, nutrient depletion of certain nutrients, probably zinc being the most primary, but really a bunch of them. And then when I did this strategy of cleansing myself, whether it's cleaning my diet, cleaning my intake, and reducing my intake of fasting and all the rest of it, it was resolving some issues. But I had this tendency to already be addicted to being adrenalized, what they call it, adrenaline junkie. And so I thought this was great because it was a way of having even more adrenaline without having to take any drugs. But it was actually just leading me to be more and more depleted, and to the point where I got so severely depleted and so severely sympathetic nervous system overstimulated, that my body was really unable to detoxify at all, ironically. And as I said, I don't think I'm alone. I see lots of people who are in a similar position who swear off fasting for life. What I don't love is often they end up on the opposite side. They're like, oh, I'm going to drink orange juice and milk all day, and I'm never going to go 15 minutes without consuming some kind of calories to keep my blood sugar high and keep my stress chemicals low. And it's like, maybe that's appropriate for some people to kind of counteract what they've been through. But I just wish, oh God, I've just become Mr. Moderation, I guess. I just wish that everyone would kind of just, accept the moderate position on things. And I realize when you've been extreme on one side, sometimes you need to go a little bit, not just medium, you need to go a little bit the other way to balance out. But to be aiming for moderation, because I see so many people, sometimes I certainly read the comments, but I see, like reviews on things, and I see forum comments and group comments and all the rest of it. And so often I just see people who are like, have been trying so long, and I really, I feel for them because I was in a similar position. But what I see is just swinging between extremes of this or that, or this and that. And a lot, and then when you suggest, well, why not find something personalized that's actually right for you, and then, I can't afford testing and all the rest of it. I can't afford this. But then, they spend a lot of money pursuing this extreme or that extreme and all the rest of it. And I mean, I sell supplements, but I would say you're better off not taking it, not spending the money on supplements, spending the money on testing instead to find out what's actually, right for you and appropriate for you. It's just a much better investment of money. Um, because the thing is, like, I'm not against supplements. Got a bunch above my head now, this new setup. And I was just thinking the other day, I know some people are going to criticize me for, oh, you're just trying to sell supplements. Literally, like, pills have saved my life, from the absolute mess I was in 2020 to how I feel now. The right pills made a massive difference for me. Pills, powders, liquids, whatever.
No, absolutely. And like you said, well, as well, if you are so deficient in something, how are you meant to get it? Well, these are that bridge. They
Yeah,
really
I
can
could
be.
eat. I really think I could eat nothing but beef and oysters, and I still wouldn't have built my zinc back up after almost 40 years of vegetarianism and not eating meat. Yeah, there are just certain instances where you have to address reality rather than ideals. Absolutely. Um, but yeah, my key point is, so I'm not against them, but the problem is the wrong ones will make you worse, and absolutely did. Also, supplements. I've ended up in hospital before from taking the wrong supplements, like in an emergency ward. So they can save your life, but they can also threaten your life. It's such a big difference and such a big distinction. And I'm talking about supplements now. We're talking about fasting. Not eating can really make you worse, but overeating can really make you bad. Like, everything can potentially be a bad idea, and it's just so important to actually test and find out what's right for you.
No, it's a really good point. This has been very helpful, at least to me, and I'm sure to our beautiful listeners out there, because it's just having and taking that pause for a minute to check in where you're at and just decide, yeah, is this the right course of action for me, for what I have? Because just like you said, going back to the thing about supplements, like, yeah, we see that thing, that supplement, that or that program, and we think this is going to be the thing, and then we spend the money, and then it ends up, like you say, probably most likely putting us in a worse position. So testing is key, finding out where you are, checking to see whether this thing is going to have the desired impact that you want ultimately. Yeah, no, beautiful. Great, Owen. I'm really happy. Is there anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my general advice, but the more specific advice is do some testing. If you want to fast, advanced self genetics would be a great start because of how cost effective it is, especially the nutrient category and the detoxification categories. Find out how well your body is going to be able to deal with those toxins once you flood your system with them, and find out how likely you are to be nutrient deficient or other things being equal. But better still, on top of that, uh, testing I wish I'd have done. Do some before and after testing. Test your level of various nutrients, not just the classic iron, B12, all your doctor will test, but, like a broad spectrum test that tests a bunch of different B vitamins, a bunch of different minerals, like ones we talked about, like zinc, selenium, copper, magnesium, for instance. And then do it before and after, and maybe not, 1 3 day fast, but, like, do it and then do 3 months of fasting some of the time and then do it again, and see what impact it's had. Has it increased your absorption of those nutrients, or has it actually depleted them? And then test the liver function and kidney function. And, even if, usually liver enzymes aren't raised unless there's a quite reasonably serious problem from my perspective. But if they were low when you started and they were halfway up when you finished, that's a sign that your liver's still struggling. Like, those liver enzymes raised are they're not just a sign of liver struggling, they're a sign of liver damage. That's what they actually mean. And obviously the liver has the amazing ability to regenerate very well, but still, you don't want to be pushing it to the point where you're actually damaging your liver. So, check and find out. So yeah, I say it all the time, but especially with fasting, test, don't guess.
Definitely. Yeah. And as always, everyone, we are so appreciative of your time. And please remember, supporting our sponsors supports this podcast so that we can continue to bring you more episodes like this. And if you have any questions, please make sure you put them in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.